Uh, Hello everyone, my name is Sanjay Chaudhary. I head IMS Pro School, and some of you might be aware IMS Pro School is into skill development. We talk skills morning, afternoon and evening. But today we have a special guest with us and who can bring international perspective to skills. So very lucky to get this opportunity. So let me start by welcoming Shea Gopaul. I will read out a brief resume of hers and then you will know why we are so excited to hear from her. So Shea is a special representative of International Organization of Employers IOE to the UN. And via IOE, she represents 50 million companies from 150 different countries to the UN. Shea is also the founder and executive director emeritus of GAN Global. So GAN is a public-private partnership, and through her association with GAN, she's created about 9 million opportunities for youth globally, set up 15 GAN local networks, acquired 244 company members in the GAN network. And prior to GAN, she was involved with UN, WHO, ILO in different areas like policy, strategy, partnerships, fundraising. She's also lived across the globe, Mauritius, Gabon, Morocco, Switzerland, and she's a fellow of the ISA Institute of Labor Economics. So I could go on and on about Shea. Shea, thank you so much for joining us and agreeing to share your views with us. So let me get you started. And I think since we talk to students so often, I think students would be very excited to hear about GAN Global and how what it does in the area of skills.
Well, first of all, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And it's really an honor to meet with you today and to do this interview. My heart is always and will be, even in my current job, around skills, youth, and giving them opportunities. So I'm very happy to speak with you today. So just a bit of a background, as you mentioned, the Global Apprenticeship Network, I started that like 6 years ago in Geneva, Switzerland. And the background was that it was 2012. And if you recall, after the financial crisis, after so many years, there were so many youth unemployed, and it was a crisis. And working with ILO, we brought many youth together, and also through the G20, where I've been very much involved with the Business 20, there was an analysis done by OECD and ILO. And although we always knew this, employer-driven education is really, really critical. And when you looked at the G20 countries and advanced and less advanced economies, you saw that when employers were involved in the education, there was a lower youth unemployment. So in countries like Switzerland, Germany, Austria, even in other countries where they were starting to embrace this idea of apprenticeships, where the education is linked to the skills and training that employers need, and that employers were engaged in the design of the curriculum, there was less youth unemployment. Now, it's not easy to just cut and paste those systems, but we realized apprenticeships were really a win-win situation. Yes. So based on this sort of background, we started trying to get more and more employers involved. And we realized that it's not so easy to cut and paste the Swiss model, although it is considered one of the best models in the world. You have to remember that they have a very strong educational system, good mathematics, they all speak at least 3 or 4 languages, etc. But an apprenticeship system in Switzerland is highly regarded. It is not considered a second-class education. It's highly respected. And so one of the things that we did was we needed to bring up the status of apprenticeships. And so I was looking for CEOs who had started their careers as apprentices. And we had excellent examples. Sergio Armoti, who is still the CEO of UBS, started his career as an apprentice. And he was one of our advocates. The same thing for the CEO of ABB and many other companies that we saw was excellent examples where the skills that you learn in an apprenticeship is something that you can carry forward for the rest of your life. And so we started this, but we knew that in order to set up apprenticeship systems, you needed good policies. And not every country has very easy policies. And I came to India and I worked with some of the government people and others where we were looking at when you were setting up and revising your apprenticeship system, which you've done an awful lot of great work and it really has developed. And I think that at the end of the day, we realized that apprenticeships were important, but also lifelong learning. And we realized that apprenticeships were something that you could use not only for young people who were just trying to get into the labor market, but also we see a lot of these innovative apprenticeships, which they're using in the IT sector and other areas to really reskill older workers who may be losing their jobs and need to sort of find new skills and adapt to the new reality of the world of artificial intelligence.
So tell me, a lot of youth are today worried about AI. You mentioned AI briefly, AI, robotics, RPA. So all these technologies are going to take away jobs. Is that a real concern for students?
If you look at the numbers, it can be really, and especially now with the crisis, we're extremely worried. Because already you have the impact of AI, and correctly so. The numbers are really. I'm a little bit worried about giving a number because even the McKinsey study did something between a couple of years ago between 800 million to 300 million. But one thing that we do know is, and we see this already, it has had an impact. And so most of these, and I've worked very closely with these private employment agencies, and their analysis is that every job is going to change in their skills need. And so it's just not the new jobs, but also other jobs. So the impact in the numbers is there. And we are concerned about the fact that you could lose certain jobs. But what is really key is this is also an opportunity. And people that have the right skills, and young people today, they tend to be more IT literate than older people. I hate to make that generalization, but they've been working with their iPads and they've been working with computers since they're young. But that doesn't mean they have the exact skills that are required for these jobs. And so employers are really looking for, yes, the technical IT skills. But one of the things that we have to look at is when you're looking at robotics and AI, you need this STEM, what we call science, technology, engineering, mathematics skills. But one of the key things is also your mindset. If you're going to be working in this area and you're going to be developing programs, you need to be creative. You need to be collaborative. And these are also skills which, on the one hand, we talk about the technical skills of AI, but also to work in AI, there's something which we call these soft skills: collaboration, persuasion, creativity, adaptability. These are really critical skills that even people that are working in front of their computer, they need to be able to collaborate. Yep. And so many of these companies are talking about, yes, we need you to learn some of these skills, but we also need you to have these soft skills. So interesting enough, when I was working in the beginning with a lot of these large IT firms, such as Ericsson, Telefonica, Huawei, IBM, many of them were saying that they were actually hiring young people who had the right attitude. And the technical skills is something that they could teach them. And so that's why it's very critical for young people to understand that their attitude, their thirst for learning, this lifelong learning attitude is critical for what employers are looking for. So I would worry less about the numbers in AI and learning to get on the track to adapt to this new reality, which we all, old or young, have to adapt to.
I'm so glad to hear that from you, because we tell students that there are three aspects that you need to learn. One is the technical skills, the other are the soft skills and sometimes the right brain part, and the third is attitude, because attitude takes you further than most of the skills will ever do. So I'm so glad you mentioned that in your comments. Now, while there is a threat, there are also opportunities emerging, like cybersecurity, like digital marketing. So it's not just gloom all the way. I mean, there are new types of jobs also emerging, and I think you briefly did something on the cybersecurity training side as well.
Yes, I think there are a lot of opportunities. I will say, you mentioned digital marketing. I think some of these employment agencies were saying that that is the most in demand right now. Now, in cybersecurity in the US, this was when we started looking at adapting apprenticeship programs to the US. The US does not have an educational system that's really based on apprenticeships. Apprenticeships are more in shipbuilding and carpentry, but not in other areas. And we realized when we wanted to adapt and start looking at apprenticeship programs, we needed to look out of these sectors. And so one of the key areas came up was cybersecurity. So, and I think this is an interesting point because often India has a similar educational system, both to the British and to the Americans. In the US, as you know, everything is pushed to do university education. But there is a university degree, which is called an associate's degree, which is a 2-year degree. So you do high school and then you do 2 years. And so there was something which was designed in the US along the lines of the needs of the IT sector. And some of the IT companies were, as you know, we talk about blue collar jobs and white collar jobs, and they coined them new collar jobs. And this is really linked to this whole concept of the demand of employers. They needed a bit more than a high school education, but they didn't need a PhD in philosophy. And so they designed an apprenticeship program, which was also linked to this associate's degree with what we call community colleges. And so it was a win-win. You got your apprenticeship, you were already working, you got 2 years of experience during your apprenticeship, and you walked out with an apprenticeship award, but also a university community college associate's degree. So I think sometimes we just have to think creatively, but certainly the demand in the IT sector is so critical. But I think that there's a win-win situation in working in bringing employers together, and I know that you are doing this as well, and working in designing these skills programs that employers be engaged. And there's also the technical work, but also the practical work, which goes along with the whole education cycle.
Right. So in India, some of the companies have gone to the extent of starting their own universities. Do you see that trend globally, where actually, Google might start a university or take over a university to manage, or Facebook might run a university tomorrow? Do you actually see some of the companies taking over the education aspect?
Well, if I step back, we always have tended to think that education, healthcare, these were something that governments provided. And we're seeing more and more that the demand is such that employers can't wait in some cases to wait to see that the educational system adapts. Now, I'm a big fan of someone at the OECD, Andreas Schleitzer, who is the head of, the PISA and PISA's the grading of educational systems of OECD countries, etc. He has recently come out with a book, and he says we need a revolution. And I agree with him. We are spending in the public sector and the private sector enormous amount of resources in education, which is great. But are we using those resources wisely? Is there not a way that we could band and come together and use those resources in a more efficient way. Now, this is great that companies want to set these programs up, and many of them are excellent programs. So maybe what we should be doing is copying their programs, and everyone sort of being able to benefit from those important programs. But the risk is also that the large companies who can afford to develop those programs have great skills and great people working for them. But what about the small, medium-sized companies, where in most countries, that's where job growth is? How do they have the time and the resources to train people? Now, there are some excellent examples. In Switzerland, they do this. They set up these apprenticeship programs, and suppose the company needs 10 apprentices, well, they may train 50. And those other 40s will go and work in SMEs in the country, in other companies throughout the country. So I think this is not just a yes and no kind of answer. I think it's great employers are involved. I think a lot of them are grouping together, which is also excellent. But also I think that we should be really thinking, and especially now where there are so many children that are online and learning through these online programs, is not a way that we could come together, public and private, governments and companies, in trying to work together in developing these programs.
I was looking at some statistics, and it says that, how higher education has become so expensive. I mean, based as compared to, the basic consumer price index, it has gone up 8 times further. So doesn't it put the entire higher education sector itself at risk?
Yes, but I have to say that higher education, and there's no country in the world that's higher than where I am right now in the United States. And really people and parents and people come up with good family values, and we all save our money to put our kids into the best universities, and education is so critical. And I know in India, this is part of your culture and your DNA, that, if you're good in life, you'll end up going to Oxford or Cambridge. But we don't all have to go to Oxford and Cambridge. And do we all need these very expensive university degrees? We need doctors, we need lawyers, we need people with PhDs. But I think one of the key things we have to think about is, do we need X amount of these? And so this is, when you're looking at this, not only is it really, really expensive, but the second thing is, many of these young people have gone on to take on these very complex university degrees, and they're not finding a job.
Yep. Yeah. So in fact, 47% are underemployed. That's what the statistics says. So that brings us to the first point you made. Once there is respect for skills, then people will not mind doing these rather than taking expensive degrees which put them into debt forever. So
that's absolutely right. And the other thing is the return on investment. We did some studies on the return on investment in investing in apprenticeship programs or skills programs, etc. And it's enormous, the payback, both for young people, for their parents, and also for employers. But, higher education, we need to be rethinking this. With all the online programs there are, I would hate to say that people shouldn't go to university. Yes, you need to be thinking about education, but I'm not really sure we have to say university. Employers today are saying less and less they are looking for a university degree. What they're looking for when you're doing your LinkedIn pages and you're updating your CV, etc., they're looking for competencies. They're looking for skills and not necessarily degrees. Having said that, there's a place for our philosophers, our doctors, but there's also really important places in society for people that are looking at such things as cybersecurity, building our cars that we use, in manufacturing. So these are all respectable, decent jobs, but they also need skills. Having said that, the one thing that I would say is we need to make sure that even in our skills programs, we tend to think of our university degrees making us lifelong learners. No, we need that in primary education, secondary education, skills programs, to really teach people that we need to have that thirst for lifelong learning. Amount of opportunity. And given the demographics, you have an aging population, but you have a huge, what we call a youth bulge. And so it's chronic and critical that you really address the youth population, their needs, their desires. I think one of the things you need to do is listen to them. It's always great to hear from young people what they think are part of the solutions. I think you've been doing a lot, which is really great, in really trying to get people in that mindset of both young people, but you also have to educate the parents, because at the end of the day, the parents and the school advisors and your secondary school teachers, etc., to really trying to encourage them to also talk openly to young people about where are the opportunities. It's really important to know where are the jobs and where are the future jobs. Now, I'm really hesitant to say that I could predict what the next jobs are in the next 5 years. Even the employers themselves say that when you come into a job in the IT sector, you can assume the job that you have now will be completely different 3 years down the line. So theirs goes back to that adaptability. But I think India has been doing a lot. I think stressing the critical role of lifelong learning, of education, which you have a strong history on, but also moving people from the rural areas, the informal sector, and trying to give them a lot of, the basic education is really, really critical. There's not one sort of solution, but I think it's really, again, I would go back to bringing public, private, along, in trying to build your systems together collaboratively, but also hearing the voice of young people. And really also accepting that, you're, given your population, you are going to be more and more the lead country as we look at the economies, etc. And so there are an enormous amount of people from India that are in my country, the United States, very successful ones. And so I think you're also going to see that people will leave the country, people will stay in the country, people leaving the country being able to have really good skills in moving around is really, really critical. But you have an advantage. You have a lot of languages, but many of the people do speak English. And that's a big advantage, we have to say, in the world today. You have very strong STEM education. Those IT skills are really critical, and you are known for having an advantage there as well.
Yeah. So a very important point you made there was making parents and school advisors understand the importance of skills. So I think that's another big missing part, where people haven't started to appreciate the importance of skills, and long way to go on that aspect. And one final question before I let you go. Since you've been associated with UN, we get a lot of students who are ambitious and who want to work with UN. What would be your advice to them?
Well, just remember that the UN is a huge body. So you have the UN and you have the specialized agencies that are all over the world. I think for the UN and their agencies, I think there's if you're thinking of working there, I think you need to be interested, you need to be dedicated, you have to have a conviction for that kind of work, because it takes a lot of dedication. You have to move around to different countries. You need to have good language skills. You can't just get in with just one language, etc. You need to have the skills of negotiations, being able to listen, because unlike in a private sector where you can move very quickly and take a decision, make a decision very quickly, there's that consultation process of all the different countries, and you don't always get exactly what you want, but you have to be able to negotiate. But the UN has a limited amount of positions, and it's also unfortunately based on they need to be fair and make sure that they have diversity from all the different countries. So in my days in working in the UN, I remember that we had extremely highly qualified Indian diplomats, etc. But often they were overrepresented because there were so many of them. You should also think there's a lot of work outside of the UN, many NGOs, many other international organizations that are doing wonderful work from global, as you were talking about, the whole international world, globalization, trade, but also areas of public health, migration, etc. So while you can look and aim to the UN, there are many other organizations and foundations, more and more. You know, when you look at the WHO where I worked, when I first started, we started talking to the Gates Foundation, and now the Gates Foundation is doing extremely good work on public health. So there are other opportunities out there as well as the UN.
Thanks. That's wonderful to hear from you. So Shea, thanks so much for doing this for us. It's brilliant listening from you, and I'm so glad most of the stuff you talked about, we keep talking, and somebody with an international perspective sort of highlighting those points is so nice to hear. So hopefully we'll get to see you in India sometime.
Well, thank you very much. You know, I have a soft spot for India. I love visiting India, but your work is great. It's really critical that you carry on. Because we have to remember that the youth and the young people are critical for our societies, especially now. These are very, very difficult times. And so I wish all of you well, stay safe, stay healthy, and we will get out of this, and hopefully we will be able to travel soon and I would be able to visit you.